Hello there and welcome to Ancient Theories channel. So, recently I've been minding my own business. Nothing crazy, just checking the electricity in some grapes. For a humorous purpose, let's check if Romans generated electricity from grapes, because why not? Hey, don't judge me. If that Indian YouTuber can tell people that pouring water on the lingam ritual was used to generate electricity, then why couldn't Romans use grapes and electrodes? And if you think that's stupid, well, that guy has more than 1 million views, okay? Okay? Disclaimer time, I do not believe that Romans had electricity, and I do not think the lingam was used in any sort of electricity generation process. Yes, there is a minor current in a grape, but it's just 1 milliampere, and yes, I'm using an almost identical multimeter as the Indian YouTuber. Guys and gals, electricity is a form of energy, but you can't compare voltage alone to energy. You need to take into account the relation between current and voltage to even think about energy itself. Those grapes do not have any significant electrical power in them. There. I said it. Even if I would get 5 volts, but the current shows 1 milliampere, then that would be extraordinary, but still no real power. Meanwhile, I want to talk about something different. I recently heard. Well, not recently, some time ago, but you know. The thing is, this alternative archaeology guy, Graham Hancock, if you are here then you probably heard about him. He tells a story, which is a precarious one. The thing is, once upon a time in the year 650 BCE there were Jews living in Egypt on the Elephantine Island, and those Jews had a temple of Yahweh, and this temple existed for some time in the same time when other Jews lived in Jerusalem, and those had their own temple, for Yahweh of course. And this is a big deal. Why? Because in Jewish tradition there is only one God and only one temple, and the temple is the place for storage of the Ark of the Covenant. And if there is no Ark, then you should not build a temple. And if there is another temple, you should not build a temple. And you definitely shouldn't build one on some random island in Egypt. However, those guys did exactly that. They built a temple. And we know that the Jews in Jerusalem knew about it. And they not even were fine with this, but the main Jewish priest in the old temple was enthusiastic at least about it. After all, that's the story told by papyrus and letters which, well, we have a lot of documents from that period of time from that certain island because it just happens that we found a lot of those very well preserved. If you want to know more about the source, then those are Elephantine papyri, and a lot of those are about marriages, real estate and loans. Marvelous read. If only you are an accountant, which I am not. Okay, one odd thing is that the Jews even decided to live in Egypt in 650 BC because those two weren't keen on each other. The even more bizarre thing is that they built a temple for Yahweh. What is close to insanity is the fact that the Jews in Jerusalem were okay with that. And you know what? This is just the beginning of the weird stuff. I will leave those grapes now. There is no way that Romans generated electricity from those. But hey, I tried, okay? I did something, I tested something, which is the bare minimum for me. Let's go back to the topic. The Elephantine Island. Here it is, on the map. Okay, remember when I said Egyptians and Jews didn't like each other back then? You see, those Jews on that island weren't exactly model Jews from that period of time. They practiced Judaism, but in the old form. And by the old form, I mean the Judaism from the times of King Solomon, which lived around 950 BC, so 300 years before the Jews built the temple on the Elephantine Island. But after King Solomon, there was a division. His son decided to, be a harsh ruler, and some didn't like that. After that, there were 2 kingdoms, one of Israel and one of Judah. At least this is a consensus about King Solomon. But at the time there was only one form of Judaism, the Iron Age Judaism, which is the kind of Judaism which requires burning sacrifices for God, like grains but also animals like rams. In that period, the priest used to take the blood of those animals and pour it for God in the temple to wash the sins of people. Yes, that kind of Judaism. 300 years later we have a more humane religion, Judaism without burning animals. The kind of Judaism that reconsidered some things, One of those was the classification of sacred texts and determining which one should be canon. Somewhere around 600 or 500 BCE, the Jews created the first version of the Torah, which in fact is a group of 5 books. Nevertheless, the Jews in Elephantine Island were all about the old Judaism. And yes, they burnt more animals, especially rams. In that time, Babylonian Empire decided to destroy the first temple in Jerusalem. Well, they looted it in 604 BCE and then destroyed it 30 years later. You see, it was an accident during the siege, but things happened, and the Jews of Jerusalem were living without a temple till 516 BCE. After that, we call it the Second Temple period. But wait, the Second Temple was already there on Elephantine Island all the time, and the Jews from Jerusalem knew about it. Nevertheless, they decided to build another one. This just seems like nobody remembers the rules anymore, right? Actually, some scholars believe that it was only a shrine or an altar on Elephantine Island, not a temple, definitely not the temple of Yahweh. Well, but those Jews on Elephantine Island not only believed it was the temple, but they even stated that it was the only temple after the destruction of the first one. And those private altars were fine with the doctrine, and the offerings on those private altars were still okay. But in Egypt, there was a second group of Jews who also built a private altar in Heliopolis, but they called it the Chonio Temple, not the altar, and it wasn't okay with the Jews in Jerusalem. Double standards? The Jewish scholars say that it was a different time, so different execution of the same rules, but the rules were more vague in the older times. Seems like double standards to me. There is also a thesis that those Jews on Elephantine Island built the temple not sooner than in 587 BC, after the destruction and looting of the first one, or in 604 BC after the looting of the old one. And the archaeological data can't tell because it's the weird fragment now. We know it existed because it is mentioned, but only in 525 BC and because it was burnt to the ground by Persian army in 410 BC. But why would the Persian army randomly destroy a temple? Because of money. Egyptian priest of Khnum paid them to do so. And why? Well, the best theory is because of the Jewish rituals of sacrificing sheep, especially during Passover, which is odd even for the old times. Was that priest an early eco-activist? Was he against animal cruelty? Maybe, but it would be ahead of its time, by a long shot. The Persians definitely got money for the burning part. The motive of the priest is unknown, but we did not find the site of the burning. Was that temple wooden? For God's sake, they were burning their animal on an altar. How on earth did the Persians burn down an altar designed for burning rams and sheep on it? And this is the story written on that papyrus. No archaeological site, no reason, and an unprovable scenario. What's next? Well, the Jews asked Persians for funds to help them rebuild the temple. This is weird. Didn't the same Persians just burn it down? You see? They asked not the same Persians but other Persians. To be specific, they asked the Persian vizier, who's something like today's high-ranked politician or minister. Why not the local governor? Because the local governor got even more money and accepted the Egyptian priest's plan in the first place. Now, let the fun begin. If you think that this story was all over the place, hear that. In 400 BC we had the Second Temple in Jerusalem standing. The Jews on the Elephantine Island actually got help and money to rebuild their temple, and they did. 10 years after the destruction they rebuilt it, for Persian and Jewish money. And what happens next? They left. They abandoned the island, for unknown reasons. To summarize it, Jewish people decided to come to the Elephantine Island, settled there, and built a temple, or the temple here, which breaks a lot of rules. Jerusalem was okay with that. They practiced old Judaism, burnt animals there. Then, in vague circumstances, there was a plot to burn their temple, which was designed for the burning sacrifices. The plot was successful. Then they got money from the oppressor's government and their kin, rebuilt something and left. And we can't find any evidence of those temples burnt or rebuilt. It's like it wasn't even there in the first place. The Jews are gone, the temple is gone, and well, the Persian money is also gone. It smells like insurance extortion, doesn't it? Why on earth would you go to a foreign country, which doesn't tolerate your culture, which is under the occupation of another country which doesn't really like you and your kin? And why settle here and break the rules of your own faith? Okay, then after at least 180 years of living there, you just pack your stuff and leave, just after the rebuilding of your temple. Unless you had a different plan in your head. Keep in mind that people rebuilding the temple are grandchildren of the newcomers. The second temple in Jerusalem is standing proud now, and building a temple or rebuilding whatever is wrong, right? The story is truly bizarre. Graham Hancock and his followers believe that those guys had the Ark of the Covenant with them and went to Ethiopia. Others speculate that those Jews returned to Jerusalem or vanished in Egypt. Some of them converted to other religions, and others ended up in Heliopolis, where in the next hundreds of years there will be the Chonyo Temple. I don't know what exactly happened to them, but I know one thing: they took the Persian money with them. On the other hand, do you know that just around the corner there was and still is Aswan City? You would need only to cross the Nile to get from the Elephantine Island to Aswan, and it is the same Aswan known for its quarry and the unfinished obelisk, the biggest obelisk found till this day. What a lovely coincidence. Till we meet again.